Hello and welcome to another Reaconteur video, and in today's video I wanted to discuss the worst parts of Deepwoken. Most of these are pretty useless, actually useless, as in features that I don't think need to be in the game, but I'll essentially be covering Deepwoken's worst mechanics, but also the major negative effect Deepwoken has had on Roblox as a whole. Make sure to subscribe, since only about 20% of the people watching this video right now are actually subscribed. And also I'm live on Twitch. I'm live on Twitch right now as of releasing this video. I'm live on Twitch 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 3 times a week. I'm live on Twitch! Anyway, let's get straight into it. Alright, this video kind of ranges in topic a lot because I'm going to go from discussing Deepwoken's useless mechanics to discussing stuff that I don't like in Deepwoken to straight up discussing and talking about the negative influence Deepwoken has had on Roblox as a whole, because this game was very bad for Roblox. You'll understand later though. Alright, so first of all, let's cover that first topic. And the things that I think are useless and kind of just annoying hindrances in Deepwoken are, well, first of all, two. Starting off with the two worst bars on the entire UI. Blood and water. Both of these, in my opinion, do not need to be in the game and are kind of useless, right? They really don't need to be in the game. So let's start with the water bar. This thing is stupid. In comparison to the hunger bar, the only difference is it drains faster, drains more in water, and it won't kill you instantly. But water is still used for regen and hunger still kills you. So why does the water bar even exist other than to make your screen blurry? It feels like the water bar was added for realism and the need to drink water, rather than for an actual focus on gameplay and immersion. Because it's not hard to get water in Deepwoken, but it's just kind of there. Like, ROBLOX, for example, did this well, where they had the food bar and no water bar, and you just kind of needed to eat for regen. But they added this other bar that doesn't even really matter. If they merged the water and food bar into just food, and I guess added a blurry vision threshold, functionally nothing would change. It'd just be less annoying to eat only food than pressing E at a fountain and also eating food. But even then, most people only eat fruit in-game anyway, because it's super easy to farm and provides a lot of water and hunger, so there's no real point in eating normal food when you could just eat fruit and then you get water and hunger, and it basically goes back to the water and hunger bar being, you know, the same thing, because they fill at the same ratio and they pretty much drain at the same time. And then there's the blood bar. This thing is just kind of stupid because it could have been an anti-sustain tool for ganks. They could have used it for actual game balance if they made it so it only replenished out of combat, and, you know, they reworked its drain mechanics and its, you know, the fact that it kills you, and just made it so it wouldn't be able to let people regen as much in fights, because it would have been a good solution for the old infinite ganks that would happen in Pre-verse 2 Deepwoken, where people would end up fighting in groups for hours on end, either campfire cycling or just returning from the depths. But instead, the blood bar acts like a secondary health bar with way more health, with a weird win condition for any fight specifically for blood rend users at this point, because even dagger users don't really drain it enough on average for a win through it, but it just feels really poorly designed, almost like the only reason that they added the blood bar was for the old Curse of Bloodthirsty, which would drain your blood in like 10 hits if the 300% damage buff didn't kill you in 10 hits anyway. Which I guess back then it wouldn't, because everyone had like 1200 HP, but still, they pretty much just used it to make Curse of Bloodthirsty give you a second and non-health related win condition in a fight. And while there have been builds that utilize the opponent's blood bar like a win condition, mainly dagger builds or blood rend and dagger, it's never been a thing that mattered long term, and even now for blood rend users, it doesn't really matter outside of specifically really long ganks, because in any 1v1 scenario, the fight won't ever last that long. So honestly, I think they should just remove the water bar and rework the blood bar in some way, because right now they both just kind of feel useless. The only time the blood bar even comes into action is if you are specifically a blood rend user in a gank with a lot of people who keep cycling at campfires, which is rare because a majority of the player base at this point plays in the Chime of Conflict, and people just don't like playing in Deepwoken Overworld nearly as much. Along with that, let's speak of Chime of Conflict, because this is one of the worst parts of Deepwoken in my opinion. I don't like the Chime of Conflict. I think 1v1s are boring, and I think it's still the only, like, good way to fight anyone that's worth fighting. Because in the overworld, I rarely have good fights against actual players, because a majority of the time, the players in the overworld just aren't as good as the Chime of Conflict players, because, you know, they're just different types of players. The people who are playing Chime of Conflict generally improve more rapidly in PvP because they're doing more of it. But the problem with this is, since Chime of Conflict exists, and I don't want to play it, I can't find people who are fun to fight against because none of them are very good. So I either end up having to play Chime of Conflict to fight anyone worth fighting, anyone challenging, anyone who's going to be entertaining to fight, or I have to play in the overworld. And the people in the overworld are generally pretty bad, and I mean they're pretty bad, because I've been in overworld fights where they're 3v1s and I've won them against any players who are on par with my skill level or anything, which I'm not even particularly good at Deepwoken anymore because I don't play it enough. I should be losing that fight. But the people in the overworld are just kind of a lot worse than the people in Chime, but then I don't get the benefits of overworld fights, like, you know, being able to mix numbers outside of, you know, just 1v1, 2v2, 3v3s, which generally just kind of devolve into 3 or 2 separate 1v1s that happen all at once, and then, you know, people get ganked once someone starts losing, right? So it's just whoever can kill the first person wins, versus ganks, which have different mechanics like bells, campfires, and just a whole lot of other factors that are more fun to fight in that Chime of Conflict doesn't have. Anyway, I also don't think Voidwalker as an origin is well designed. They essentially force PvP players who want to play PvP to progress to go out and bother players who don't want to do PvP, forcing them to do PvP. So majority of the time you have PvP Voidwalkers going around ganking PvE players, which is stupid. If you're going Voidwalker because you want to PvP, why didn't the devs just make Voidwalkers fight each other? Then you have the players who want to PvP fighting the players who want to PvP. And before anyone says it wouldn't fit the lore, the devs could just retcon it. They retcon a lot of stuff as it is in the lore. Making the Voidwalkers a group of like competitive assassins who kill each other to rise in status wouldn't change much anyway, and honestly, it'd probably be more interesting lore than what they currently have for them just being a mercenary group right now, because there's like 30 other mercenary groups in Deepwoken. Now, I'm probably going to get a little bit of hate for this, but I think Shaky Block was probably the worst implemented mechanic in the game. Not necessarily for what it is, but for the fact that it kind of changes a lot about Deepwoken's core combat and what it was supposed to be in Verse 1 and how it was initially envisioned. It just feels like Shaky Block was the beginning of Deepwoken's vision changing majorly. Now, for those of you who don't know, Shaky Block happens when you miss a parry and try to block. The Shaky Block frames are essentially a period of time where you can't block, only vent, or try to parry. And if you try and block, you'll just eat a hit. Now, the problem with this is that the fact that it changes what Deepwoken's core combat was being based on in the first place. Because Deepwoken was the first, or at least the most popular, non-stun combat in the game, where generally the punishment you receive for any negative action is getting hit once, and then being able to reset. Whereas Shaky Block makes this reset very punishing, and making it much more likely for you to be able to get chain attacks, or get hit with chain attacks on opponents after they hit you or land a hit, right? Which is why ever since Verse 2, combos have been much more utilized than in Verse 1. However, that is also a byproduct of Deepwoken's mantras becoming much more advanced than they were in Verse 1, which you can especially see the difference when you compare how much the VFX are different in comparison to new mantras, right? Like, look at Fireblade and then look at Flaming Scourge and tell me that those are even remotely like the same game. They're just not, because the game had a very different vision back then. And I get that they wanted to change it all because of like infinite parry trades and stuff, but there were definitely better ways to do this without implementing a system that pretty much just punishes you for getting hit when your punishment should be getting hit. Along with that, I hate uppercuts because they are used completely differently for heavy users than for anyone else, really. Now, a lot of you may notice that in my gameplay footage, I don't uppercut. Why? Because my brain is stuck in Verse 1, which is when I actually used to play the game, and PvP more specifically. That's when I used to actually be good at the game. But also, I'm a light user, right? I have no reason to ever uppercut. Since the uppercut speed is static, the slower your weapon is, the more beneficial uppercutting is. So heavy users specifically getting a free mix-up tool that wildly changes their swing speed, meanwhile light users uppercut, and it's the same speed as their M1s with less damage. So as a light user, it's actually not worth it to go for an uppercut, but heavy users get a free mix-up tool on top of being arguably the best weapon type, regardless of the fact uppercuts are part of why they're considered as such most of the time. I just feel like they shouldn't vary nearly this much, and uppercuts should be more useful for light and medium users, because the best case scenario, I uppercut someone as a light user, I crit. What do? They probably parry it because crits are really easy to parry. Or I get an M1. Okay, but the problem with that being I just spent more time and energy and fighting efficiency to get a single M1 when like a feint fake out would have been more effective at that point. And another thing I hate how good attunementless mantras are. Like, I remember that the game was supposed to be like making your builds, right? And everyone was supposed to have something different. It was supposed to be really original. But then we have like Exhaustion Strike being one one of the best moves in the entire game, and shoulder bash being another really good move. And I don't care that these moves are good, right? But I hate that they're attunementless and they're really good, because the stats that you have to go for them are what people go in their major builds normally, but then you're incentivized to use less attunement stuff because you have the incentive of these really good mantras. Like you just use Exhaustion Strike whenever you want. You M1, you Exhaustion Strike, it hits through their shaky block, free, right? Versus people who would actually be like experimenting with mantras done with attunements, but you know, they don't, because they don't have to, because the best mantras in the game can be gotten on any build, which I know it was for like versatility's sake, but it kind of sucks how strong these mantras are when you just shoulder bash and Exhaustion Strike through everything, and you don't bother like making anything that's actually unique or using anything unique. Everyone just uses the same mantras, right? Now for the big part, the influence Deepwoken has had on Roblox as a whole. Oh my god, I hate what Deepwoken has done to slop anime games. It's so bad. 5 years ago, a slop anime game would come out and it'd be like Reaper 2, some Naruto game clone, or like a JoJo game or some Battlegrounds or something like YBA, or sorry, not YBA, Your Bizarre Day, that's what it was, right? The slop was simple. You just fight, you maybe have a little bit of fun, but after Deepwoken dropped, it all changed. Slop went from simple full stun games with blocking and maybe some dodging like ABA to non-stun parry-based games with permadeath. This formula isn't fun on these random games, especially when it's done as bad as every other game has done it, right? Like really, a big problem a lot of these games have is they try to expand on the Deepwoken combat system without actually making a new one slightly based on it that complements their own game. So you end up with a game which has worse parrying than Deepwoken, but also too much or too little movement involved in it where it doesn't match the parry system well. You can't have a movement-based game and then make your main thing be parrying, right? So then you end up with games where the parrying is inconsistent despite the main mechanic in PvP being based on parrying, right? Which is why you should try and be original when making game mechanics instead of half-ripping other games. And if you're not going to be original, at least copy fully. Fake Deepwoken is still more fun than Sorcery, but then again, Sorcery was a scam. But excluding the fact Sorcery was a scam, they tried to make the game parry-based, but then they had a movement system that didn't complement it well, which is why I didn't really like that game that much. And now, when you really look at it, there are maybe only 2 games improved upon by being permadeath, which too many games have been copying the permadeath schema as well. And those 2 games are Rogue Lineage and arguably, but in my opinion not as much, for Deepwoken. The reason why I say arguably is honestly because Deepwoken hasn't benefited from permadeath aesthetically or otherwise in a long time. And with the game's meta being so strict, most of the time people just have like 15 slots and maybe 1 or 2 builds among those 15 slots in the off chance that they get wiped, because this game is really forgiving. Look, this guy I know named Arctic literally has like 15 slots and they're all identical. That's besides the point though. Rogue Lineage in particularly was heavily amplified by the permadeath aspects because you had to do PvP to progress, meaning that it was an infinitely circulating level of progression as far as the game was supposed to be played without boosting, right? So you had to play the game, you had to PvP. There was risk on both sides, but there was also gain on both sides. Essentially, for one person to progress, another must lose. Kind of like a video game elo system where as somebody gains something, someone else loses, but the total amount of gain or loss remains equal for all players in the lobby, right? Rogue Lineage ran on this system at its core, and it's kind of reminiscent of how, you know, conservation of energy and how matter can't be created or destroyed, but just in game form. It was actually really well done there because there was always risk to both sides. Deepwoken doesn't run off this ideal because you don't need a PvP to progress, and most people just don't, with the exclusion of Voidwalkers. So honestly, Deepwoken's permadeath feels kind of unnecessary, and I feel like it only affects new players anymore anyway, because any decent PvE player isn't going to wipe to the same trials and enemies they specialize in fighting, and most half-decent PvP players can do the depth trial and have an understanding of the enemies in game. So wiping is really super forgiving in Deepwoken in comparison to Rogue Lineage, and then a lot of games make similar systems that just don't work well. And I feel like Rogue Lineage does it way better than Deepwoken specifically because of the whole gain-loss elements. Like in Deepwoken, you have no incentive to this risk other than, I guess, enjoyment, which some people don't even enjoy ganking in the depths. Some people enjoy it a bit too much. So you have people who go around in the depths ganking, and it's a lose-lose, right? You either wipe or you get wiped. Nobody gains from ganking in the depths. In Rogue Lineage, there was always a gain from it. Whether it was for progression, for silver, or just for ranked elo, which is something that people like to farm for in Rogue Lineage, because you kill people in the overworld, you get ranked elo. Deepwoken doesn't have any of that, so there's really no point in, you know, attacking people, especially because you can't even drop stuff like enchants or relics on death. But yeah, I think Deepwoken has actually ruined anime game slop, and it's crazy because I used to actually enjoy some of that anime game slop. And anyway, for those of you who don't know, I'm actually making a game now. It'll have a completely unique combat system as far as Roblox goes. I won't be saying anything else about it, so you guys are just gonna have to wait. But since I'm rich, I hired a bunch of people and contracted them. So I'm going to get it done, and I'll probably have a combat test in like a month or two. But yeah, I kind of just blended together a bunch of combat systems from real games that I like, non-Roblox ones. And I'm kind of just making a good thing in Roblox. So yeah, I hope you guys will like it in like 10 years when it's released. And yeah, that's really it, I'm not gonna lie. And real quick, I just want to complain. How come every time I like mess up the pronunciation of a word and I get a little speech impediment, I'll say like, I don't even know what it was like a video or two ago, but I said some word wrong. I see like 30 comments of people just typing it out and then making fun of me for saying like wetter instead of weather or something stupid like that. Guys, can we stop doing that? Okay? It is kind of hard to talk for 15, 16 minutes straight while reading off a script with no water, no breaks, no nothing. I read every single thing in these scripts back to back, and then I cut them in editing. Stop making fun of me for a single little slip up that happens every once in a while. It is normal. None of you can talk like this. Let me see any of you talking like this and it not being complete incoherent garbage. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe, and shout out to YouTube members Green, Brick, Goobka, High Card, and Drizzy Drake Fan. I love you all. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.